All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Real Deal, European Space Agency Explorers. I'm your moderator, Erin Macdonald. My background, I have a PhD in astrophysics, doing gravitational waves, not associated with the European Space Agency, but I now currently work as the science advisor for the whole current Star Trek franchise. I would like to introduce our panelists here. First up, we have Nadine Boersma, who's the payload systems engineer for human spaceflight projects. We also have Neil Melville, who's the parabolic flight and coordinator at the European Space Agency. We have the wonderful Bob Picardo as well, who of course played the Doctor on Star Trek Voyager and is on the board of directors of the Planetary Society. And we are wonderfully joined by the host for this whole event, John Billingsley, who of course played Dr. Phlox on Enterprise and is responsible for putting this whole thing together.
And is a scientific idiot. Why they wanted an idiot on the panel, I do not know. I'm primarily here to be a butt of everybody else's jokes.
We have to establish hierarchy. It's how scientists function. So thank you all for being here. I'd like to first hand it over to Nadine and Neil. And if we can start with Nadine, if you want to tell us a little bit more about your background and your current research. I think we'd all like to hear that.
Sure, absolutely. It's a pleasure. Hi, everyone. Well, I studied robotics and computer science a long way back. And in the meantime, I'm 15 years at ESA. And what I'm doing there, I'm developing payloads. So payload are the scientific experiments which are doing the actual research. And this I'm doing for the International Space Station as well as for a new station which will fly up to the moon orbit. The plan is that the new station will go up end 24. And also for the moon. So at the European Space Station, we are planning at the moment a complete future program for having experiments also on the moon and to pick up where we have left it just a couple of years ago. So that's a little bit in the nutshell what I'm doing. So the experiments are ranging from biological experiments to radiation experiments up to even human in the loop experiments. So everything which is there in a small scale which goes up, I'm there and trying to get the best science out of it.
Very cool. I love that. Neil, how about yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. Real pleasure to be here. So I studied physics and philosophy in York in the UK. And I went straight from there to be a trainee at the European Space Agency for 1 year. And I got stuck, and it's been 20 now for my sins, but I'm still enjoying it a lot. In that time, I did some similar work to Nadine with ISS payloads. But for the last 5 years or so, I've been the coordinator of ESA's parabolic flights. Parabolic flights are a way of creating zero gravity in the short term, just 20 seconds each time, but we do it a lot of times in an aeroplane so that we can do science on board, we can test technologies, we can see how the human body reacts. And it's my job to organize and run those flights and get all the scientists the facilities that they need, the resources that they need, and make sure that they can get the results in that short time. So I get a lot of teams come past, a lot of different projects come past. It's a very interesting place to work.
Very cool. So two real experts in various aspects of humans space exploration, which is great. Bob, do you want to tell us a little bit about your relationship with space and science and your work at the Planetary Society?
Well, like Mr. Billingsley, I have no right to be on a council called The Real Deal as far as space exploration. But I have a long relationship with the Planetary Society, the world's leading space advocacy group, presently led by Bill Nye, the Science Guy, co-founded by Carl Sagan and two colleagues at Jet Propulsion Laboratory at the time, Bruce Miller and Louis Friedman. The Planetary Society is now in its 42nd year. And during Voyager's initial run in the late 90s, I was approached by the two surviving members to become a member of their advisory council, and I have worked with them ever since. I spearheaded some educational challenges for young people, such as Red Rover Goes to Mars. Presently, I'm on the executive board, and I'm the stupidest person around the table when we have our board meeting. But I have my function, and that is to to try to teach science fiction fans who may not know it that if you love science fiction, you really love science. And you really, if you want to be part of a community of people who love space, then you really want to be a member of the Planetary Society.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
Perfect. That's perfect.
I'm curious. I didn't realize that you were approached back when Voyager was airing. What was your relationship? And I guess John too, you can jump in with this as well. But what was your relationship with science before playing a science officer on a sci-fi series?
Well, I have a childhood love of science. I took advanced biology in high school, and I went off to college to be pre-med and to be an actual doctor, not just a holographic one. But I'd always acted for fun, so my ambition changed while at college. But for years, I expected that I would study biology, go to medical school, and be a physician. And now, strangely, with the tantalizing evidence of life off of Earth, even if it's just primitive monocellular life or whatever we discover on Mars or on a moon of Jupiter, wherever we find it, I believe that during my lifetime, we're going to get conclusive evidence. And that's why I think my original love of biology is sort of coming full circle through space and through my relationship with Star Trek, which brought me back to science.
Yeah, I love that. John, what was your relationship with science?
I flunked Earth Science in the 7th grade, Mr. Patrick. Even though I used all of my charm, I thought, to convince him that I did actually know something of what he was talking about. But as one of those classes where as soon as he started talking, I fell asleep. As I said, I'm here because I'm an idiot. Does the Earth revolve around the sun, or does the sun revolve around the Earth? I can never keep that straight in my head. If I can come out today just knowing the answer to that one question, I will consider this panel a success on a personal level. I feel the Now let's get back to serious questions to smart people. Serious questions to smart people. What do you say? What is it? Let me write it down. I always forget.
Okay, so just to be very clear, the Earth does go around the sun.
The Earth goes around the sun.
Yes.
I find that comforting, to be honest with you.
It is, and it is a little, misleading, and it can, you're forgiven for getting confused with it. But yes, always good to remind ourselves of that.
I will save my
follow up
question.
on Bob's excellent point. If you love science fiction, then you love science. I mean, that's how I know Nadine and myself both got into this through Star Trek. I mean, we grew up watching Star Trek. Of course, we grew up loving Star Trek. It was a favorite show for childhood years, and it inspired a love of science and particularly a love of space. And I know it's true of many of our colleagues in ESA that we wouldn't be doing what we were doing without Star Trek. And also, talking of being the biggest idiot in the room and just, having a love for it, but not a profession in it, there's no difference. There's no difference at all. There really isn't. All of us are just there because we love it, and we're supremely lucky to end up in a position to be able to do it every day, and they pay us for it. I mean, wow, it couldn't be better, right?
Yeah. Nadine, what's your relationship in with Star Trek?
Well, I'm also honest. When I was young and one of these adolescent teenagers, when others were hanging up the boys' pictures of Backstreet Boys and stuff, I had my picture of Spock on the wall, and I promised myself when I'll be grown up, there will be Star Trek, and I will become a science officer. At one point, I thought I should make good on this promise. So I think 10 years later, I did apply, not at NASA, but I did apply at ESA. And I kept that all the years. But yes, I was an ultimate fan. And I was saying, no, this is what I want to do. This is really, I want to discover, to use science, to get out there. And yeah, I've never lost this feeling. And as Neil is saying, I love my job day to day, because it's just fantastic to still do what you have dreamt of when you were, 12, 13 years old.
That's awesome. I got through my PhD by watching Star Trek. And, now working on the franchise is pretty incredible in its own right. I discovered that a scientific field was not my particular forte. I got all the way through a PhD and through a couple years of research before I decided it wasn't for me. But I went back to my roots of what got me into science, which is storytelling, and being able to inspire people to become scientists through stories. How I followed that path. That's kind of now my passion. But I can definitely understand the desire to join Starfleet as a driving force behind studying astronomy and space.
Can I ask a question? I'm just curious. So you work for the European Space Agency. What's your take on how global cooperation in space, the collaborations between the Europeans and the Americans and et cetera, what's your sense of how the global effort works these days?
I'd say it's going better and better. I'd say half of my week I'm spending meetings with the Japanese agency. I have NASA on the line. I mean, certainly all the European industry I'm working with. I think there is hardly a day where I'm not having at least 1 or 2 meetings where there are 3 to 5 different nations around the table. I think this is on one side, it gets much, much easier. And on the other side, things like export control, trying still to cling on their own areas, this is still there. And that makes sometimes life quite difficult, especially if we're talking, let's say, Europe and the States. But in general, especially if you concern people, people are really working together more and more. And it does not make any difference anymore.
Is that your experience as well, Neil?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we had a NASA experiment on a recent parabolic flight campaign. Might be one of these guys around me, actually. And we've got more coming up. I also have some payloads being developed that are go on a Chinese lunar mission in a few years' time. I've had stuff on Russian launches. I've had stuff on Japanese launches, on American space shuttle. Global cooperation is absolutely necessary. It's absolutely key for the business. It doesn't make sense to be divvying up our efforts and competing with each other. We need to be unified. Space is there for everyone. It's one planet, and every astronaut we've spoken to about it, and I'm sure you've heard it too, looks down and see that the lines in the dirt really are arbitrary nonsense from that perspective, and we've got to lose it at some point.
That's so beautiful. And I honestly, although I am an idiot and I'm not a scientist, one thing that does really appeal to me about the science is that the nature of what the collaboration requires is empiricism. And it is required by what you guys do that you set politics aside, because science isn't political. It can't and shouldn't be political. And I think what's lovely about Star Trek and science fiction and what you guys do is that you're the living proof of what and how it's possible to collaborate, because the nature of the work requires it.
Yeah, and the projects are so big and so ambitious. Our long delayed, spectacular James Webb Space Telescope, I didn't know until very recently that it was to be launched from ESA's spaceport in South America. The whole architecture for the Mars sample return mission is a handoff back and forth between NASA and ESA, as I understand it. The different phases of ultimately getting the samples returned. It's hand in hand. There's no way to conceive of something with simply one country's space agency spending all of that money, but also having the talent. I mean, the brain power. It seems to me to have these missions, as they get more and more ambitious, they demand such collaboration. So in addition to being, as my colleague Mr. Billingsley said, the very best of humanity, that space really brings us together. And that's one of the core beliefs of the Planetary Society's Bill Nye. He constantly says that. He says, first of all, NASA is America's best name brand. And he says that space really brings people together. Nobody can honestly say that they don't, even if they quibble about spending this much money on space exploration when we have people that need feeding, which is why we're all here at this moment today because of John's organization. But some people say, well, why are we spending all this money exploring when we have so much, we have so many needs here on the planet we haven't solved yet? But that's really short-sighted. Humanity's future is in space. We will eventually outgrow our planet. And it is just plain, and
it's not either or. I mean, that's one of the things that's pernicious about that way of looking at the world, that way of looking at politics, that you sort of rank all the different things you could theoretically give money to, and you cut things off the list because they're not a priority for you. It's about how a system evolves and changes and grows to create an ecosystem in which all good is done simultaneously. That's the political challenge, and I think science represents that.
Yeah. So with all the different interests and technologies that we need to continue advancing our space exploration, we talked about, crewed missions versus robotic missions versus, all the different types of stuff we can do. Because the two of you work in human exploration particularly, what do you think are the biggest challenges we have to face and overcome? More technologically focused than sociological.
The technological challenges are huge, of course, if we want to go a long way. I mean, now we've had human beings living continuously in space for about 20 years now. So we're very good at the technology to that level, to low Earth orbit. But when you want to go further, you have a lot of problems with radiation, particularly. Medical issues are going to crop up. We need to make sure we have doctors on the crew. If we had holographic doctors, it would certainly be much more efficient in terms of resources, but we're not quite at that stage yet. And that's definitely one of the biggest challenges, is keeping everyone healthy. Like I see Nadine has Mars in the background of her shot there. I mean, the minimum trip is 2 years, basically, with incredible radiation hazards, but also in a very limited space. The psychological ramifications of putting a small crew together in a small space like that for that length of time is daunting, as many of us can imagine after lockdowns over the past couple of years. So yeah, that's the human aspect is probably the hardest. I mean, we've got a lot of amazing robotic missions out there doing a lot of amazing things, but the squishy humans with a fragile bit that we need to figure out. And that's where platforms like parabolic flight come in, because we get to go into actual zero gravity. It's not a simulation. We get to take people, the scientists that are working on their own experiments, the engineers that are testing their own technologies, get to go into zero G with them to see how it feels, to see how their bodies react, to see how their experiments and their devices react, to test all of these things that we're going to take further. And having that hands-on personal experience means they really understand it and appreciate it, and you can feel it. It's a very visceral experience going into zero G. I thoroughly recommend it. I'm completely hooked. I hope I get to do it for the rest of my career. If any of you get the chance, I certainly think you should. You can come along. It would be great. So yeah, I think those are the biggest challenges, and it's a long road, right? Getting from here to there, and but we are taking it. It's one step at a time, and it's honestly so exciting and a privilege to be taking those small steps along that road, because it really is a long way, and the work's got to be done. And we may be very early. The stuff that we're developing now doesn't look quite like Star Trek yet, but it's so good that we are making little bits of progress day by day, and over time, maybe we can get there.
Yeah. You mentioned the radiation. Nadine, you said that was something you're working on. What are your thoughts on what are the biggest obstacles in that aspect?
Well, it's one part of the problem. I mean, Neil mentioned the whole human, but it's more our whole technology. We're really at the beginning. We're trying to understand what we're getting us into. And even the radiation is not completely understand. What is it doing to the material? What is it doing to, but also to the different humans? What it's doing to the electronics? If we're hitting by some radiation on the electronic, it's just failing. Well, that's stuff we cannot have. So we are just at this beginning of this great adventure. We are trying to figure out what actually is it, what we can do, what we want to do, what we have to do. And the human is certainly one huge challenge, but so is the technology, the material, how we can achieve it. How can we get enough food? How we can grow it into space? What are the differences this radiation is doing on us, on our bodies, on the food, on everything? We think that we know so much, but if you look a little bit under the surface, we hardly know anything. And that makes it so exciting, because we really learn every single day. We learn new things and we put the pieces of the puzzle a little bit together. I mean, space is fantastic, and radiation is one thing, but even such a thing like gravity. I have worked on an experiment which was looking into cells. And on Earth, these endothelial cells, they are just a heap of cells. The moment you're putting them into space, they are forming tubes, which you could use for burning victims. You could transplant them as blood vessels. No one knows why outside of gravity this is this is happening with the cells.
Awesome.
But if we haven't understood these small bits, how can we think of really living in space yet?
That's amazing. I love that.
Wow.
Well, it looks like we're pretty much out of time here. So I'd like to just last with one yes or no question. In your lifetime, do you think that we're going to see humans step foot on Mars? Nadine?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Neil?
Yes. In our lifetime, yes.
Awesome. Bob and John, final thoughts?
In my lifetime? You little, yeah, I just hope that I get to step foot in my kitchen every next day.
Well,
Remember,
if we live as long as Mr. Shatner, I'd say yes.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thank you
Optimism.
again to all of you for joining us for this panel. It was wonderful to spend some time with you and talking about how Star Trek has influenced science. Definitely check out the amazing work. Again, we have Nadine Boersma and Neil Melville here with us, and Robert Picardo representing on part the Planetary Society. So please check that out as well. And I think
I'd like to say also that I will be making another donation to the Hollywood Food Coalition today, and I hope that our viewers will join us. It's an extraordinary organization, and we are blessed to have a colleague like Mr. Billingsley and his wife Bonnie doing such wonderful work for their community, and I applaud them.
Perfect.
Thank you. With that segue, I will move us into our next little Hollywood Food Coalition video. Thank you guys so much. It was a privilege to get to spend some time with you today. I can't tell you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In addition to serving an amazing meal to all comers 7 days a week. By the way, I should let you know that we're up to $13,000, I believe. Keep those donations coming in. Huzzah. We also rescue food and share it with almost 100 other not-for-profit organizations. We buttress and augment their amazing programs. We help out shelters for women who are escaping abusive relationships. We help out drop-in centers for kids who are living on the streets, drug and alcohol rehabilitation programs. Great social service provision, in our opinion, has to include great, consistent,